still coming soon. We'll be going bowling. I'll get you details on that when I get around to getting them, but it's getting close. I'm gonna have to get you details, definite details. That's just what 3 weeks from yesterday. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And so
I just talked about that.
June 8th. June 8th, bro. Not yet. I said I will work on that this week. Huh? This is my life. This is my life right here.
22 buses. I don't know about that one.
No, the number is.
I know. I'm just joking. Probably the short one.
Yeah. It would be short. Oh man.
You or me? I was short. I was average. No, I actually didn't get my growth spurt until I was like a sophomore. I was like a solid 5'4" until 10th grade.
So for like 20 years, we were special ed. Kids would always say, "Oh, your mom, she's homeschooling me, I guess." I said, "Sure." The talented and gifted program in Tennessee is under the special ed, so yes, of course I'm talented and gifted. Thanks for pointing it out.
Talented and gifted were like pushed to your breaking point and then told, "Oh well, do it more."
Yeah.
Honors programs are
Yeah.
What? What did you say?
That is his uncle's favorite saying.
Stop doing that. You know, Chloe accidentally said that to me when I told her Mama was in the hospital. Sometimes it's bad taste, okay?
I know. I saw
What they were talking about. They were saying.
I can tell you someone died and you go, womp womp. Yes, you 100%.
Alrighty.
You talk like a 15-year-old girl, by the way. That's a very feminine
15-year-old
sentence.
girls are behind the times. That's the problem.
Women have been saying womp womp long before you did, so where'd you hear it? Your girlfriend?
Thank you. You know, when the pastor stops by the door here and he asks what we're passionate about, it's about arguments with our siblings. We're about
Of course.
Jesus. Come on now.
Yeah, it's one or the other.
I'd rather argue with my sibling than Jesus. I'm not going to argue with Jesus. With all due respect.
Oh man! All right, so I will say I did enjoy Sunday school last week. Thank you for Chris Brown coming and doing that for us, and I must say you all asked more questions than I would have give you credit for. So that was good to see. So.
Years of experience, wasting time.
Mr. Caker, easy as
Oh man!
I did it to Clarence.
I should have seen that coming.
That's impressive.
I should have seen that one coming, but I didn't. I sure as heck didn't.
Who always told us, do not do bird walking. We're doing civics or whatever. We're not geography. We're not talking about. So I got her to talk for 45 minutes solid on why teachers will never be replaced with robots.
I had a math teacher who would spend like several classes and like at least half the semester, come on, talking about AI. If you brought up AI or electric vehicles, that class period was gone. And those classes were an hour and 15 minutes. So
Yeah, whatever.
They're so useless.
no,
They're
useless.
the devil. They're the devil.
He does not mean it.
That nice, clean coal-fired power to get your electricity. Liar.
Oh goodness.
Give me a scripture video the other week, and it went over your head.
My reflexes are too fast. I would catch it. Sorry, that's a movie quote.
All right, so we'll get back into our study here. We're still talking about the transcending vision in Obadiah. So if you're in Obadiah, we're going to be looking at verse number 10 this morning. Verse number 10 says, for thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. And of course, this is fallen under our subtitle of the tough part of this vision. This is where last time we met, we kind of went over and started talking about how, for God to be given this, if we kind of tried to put a little bit of our humanistic side onto God, we could see that how tough this could be for God to be talking about and reliving the experiences that he's seen his people go through in times past, as to why he is bringing judgment against Edom. How tough that can be. We talked about how a lot of times it's difficult for people who have to go, and witness, testify on a stand against somebody and face somebody that done something to them, just here in our regular life. That's got to be fairly difficult. Somebody, done something, outrageous, and having to go and face that person. I imagine like a little kid, it'd be hard for a little kid to go and testify about something somebody did to their parents or something. Of course, we could always go a little bit further with that. And if you use your imagination, you can kind of imagine what that might be, how hard it would be on that one individual to face somebody that done something to them. So that that is just a tough position to be in, tough place to be in. We at different degrees, there's times that we've been in tough decisions, tough spots that we've had to make and had to go through and experience and stuff. So therefore, I'm kind of just reading a little bit into this when we're talking about the tough part of this vision, because we're getting down to the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of why. This is God given his reason why he's bringing judgment against this nation, against this people. So as we see here in verse number 10, one of the reasons that God is given is that third word in it, verse number 10, it says, for thy violence against thy brother Jacob. The violence. If we ever needed an Old Testament example of Romans 12 in verse number 19, this is definitely it. This would kind of set the stage for that. And if you want to flip over there, you can. If not, I'll read it to you. But Romans 12:19 says, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. So as we see here, God is living up to what he gave Paul later on. But this is still the same God. We know God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's the same person. He does not change. Even though we're looking at an Old Testament example here of this verse that Paul gave us over in Romans, it's still the same God. He's still the same vengeful, jealous God, even though he is a God of love. I mean, just the same as we all in here have those same attributes about us. There's going to be people that we love. There's going to be times when we rise up and, justifiably, a lot of times, rise up and, stand up for ourselves or stand up for someone else and come to the aid of someone. And that's what God's doing here. In this verse, we see God coming to the aid of his nation, of his people, because of the violence that was brought against them from Edom. And then, we've been talking about all of this all the way through this, just how not outright in your face, but kind of the instigative sibling, so to speak, that Edom has been. Edom has never really rose up to come against the nation of Israel, but they have not been there to come to their aid either. They have not made their life easy. And like I said, most of us in here have siblings and everything, we've seen that or experienced that, and I get to live that almost on a daily basis at my house sometimes. But yeah, I'm sure you don't.
Geneva, are you a middle child?
No.
I'm the oldest.
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
A brother and a sister.
I have a brother and sister who are younger than me. I'm the oldest.
Yeah, me too.
The
So
youngest is not as fun as people think it is. Just so we're all aware.
Yeah, but you get away with it.
No, absolutely not.
so says the
Because
majority of the ones
my
in here.
parents learned how to catch all of their tricks. So now I can't get away with nothing because they already did. Not that I'm trying to, but you know.
I think she just told on herself.
I learned my lesson a long time
You
ago.
have this
not to
recorded.
test those waters.
This is down if you ever need to go
Hey,
back
he got
and
more
pull it
trouble
up.
than I did as a
We
child.
all have. It's nothing. It just
In my defense.
I thought it was an angle. I've never gotten in trouble.
oh man. But like I said, that's.
To be fair,
But as we're
I got in so much trouble before like teenage years. It was bad, but that's neither here nor there. Sorry.
But as we're talking about, as we're looking at here, the just bringing up that sibling rivalry thing, we have to remember these two nations were family; they were siblings. So there's that extra special dynamic that is here, but yet, like we said, Edom never really rose up. They never really came to blows. Now, me and my sister, there was a few times we come to blows. I mean, it got that bad a few times. But, I mean, one time we was out in the front yard on the highway, right off the highway, I mean, it got that bad. But like I said, it never came to that when it comes to the nation of Israel. Why? Because honestly, I think that even though there was this hatred, there was this disdain, there was, just we don't like you, type mentality from the nation of Edom here that has since gone on long after Esau and Jacob both died and have been buried. That sibling rivalry has carried on throughout both of these nations. And because of that, the Abrahamic covenant with God back in Genesis, when he said, I will bless them that bless thee and curse them that curse thee, I think the nation of Edom, because, Esau, that was his grandfather that had told that down, and he has passed that on. So I think that the nation of Edom had enough sense to know we don't need to rise up against the nation of Israel. But there's no stipulation in that promise that if we just make their life miserable, we can do that. And that was more or less what the nation of Edom had set out to do. Now, the violence that they brought into the nation of Edom or the nation of Israel was not personal. It was not their own violence. It was violence that they allowed others to perpetrate on the nation of Israel. That would be like the older brother in a family. Of course, I can't use that with my kids. But that would be like the older brother who's usually the protective one. Except in my case, but no, I say that in joking. I would if I had to, but usually in a situation where you have the older brother, they're a little bit more protective. They're watchful. They don't want to see anything bad happen. If anything bad is going to happen to their siblings, it's going to be done by them, not somebody else. Type mentality. So they, but in this case, in the nation of Edom, they wasn't going to do anything to Israel, but they were going to let anybody else do whatever they wanted. And then when the nation of Israel would come to their bigger brother, just like the younger sibling would always come to the bigger brother, the stronger one, and the more intimidating one, however that dynamic typically is, when they would come to that, they would just turn their back on them and say, "You're on your own, pal. I'm going to stand over here and watch and eat the popcorn." That type of. That's what they did. So the violence here that God is talking about is not a direct personal attack. It's an indirect attack. It's the fact that, hey, you're on your own. We don't have anything to do with you. That's just like the Samaritan at the well, the Samaritan lady at the well when Christ came through over in John chapter 4. When he asked her for a drink, and she's shocked that this full-blooded Jew is asking her, a half-breed lady, Samaritan who the Jews have no dealings with, why he would be asking her for a drink and everything else. That's kind of that dynamic there is kind of like what we're talking about here is that they just let whatever, wasn't going to stand up for their sibling and stuff. But also the violence against Israel, any violence, this is where it comes down to us today. The one thing that I'm hoping that we take out of this study, if for nothing else, is that any violence going against the nation of Israel or a Jew is not going to go unanswered. I know we've just kind of come through in our society, and it's still going on to some degree or another. But all the anti-Semitism that's been going on from a bunch of spoiled, lied to American kids, young adults who have not been taught that you don't come against the nation of Israel, because we have as a society gotten somewhat distanced from the church. We've gotten somewhat distanced from the things of God and everything. So we're seeing for a large portion, I'm not going to say all, but we're seeing a large portion of a generation coming up that knows absolutely nothing about the Bible. They know absolutely nothing about the things of God. They know absolutely nothing about the fact that the best thing you can do is always stand with Israel because of the blessings that God will give you, because you stand with his people and you stand with him. Because of all of that we've seen on these university campuses and different places and everything, all these kids that's been lied to and they fell for hook, line, and sinker, and protesting and wants to see the demise of a whole race of people. We've seen that. Now here's another thing. When it comes to the history always has a way of repeating itself. If you do, and I'm sure a lot of us, I was kind of right there on the tail end of when they actually taught history in school. For the majority of you in here, this may not have been something that you got a lot deep into, but history has a way of repeating itself. There's a reason. There's a reason we've seen the monuments. If you follow the nation of Israel through the Bible, whenever they would come out of this or that, God would always tell them to do what? Build a monument. Place something here that you can come back to and see, with generations later can come back to and see the providence of God, what God had done for this generation over here in the timeline. This generation can look back to this monument and see what God did for this generation over here while they're down here, and they always have something to go back to and look at. If you go back in your mind just as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, 2 or 3, what was the big thing going on in America? We were tearing down the monuments that they were not celebratory monuments, although there are those, But a lot of the monuments that people were rising up against and tearing down were not monuments that we look to as from as a nation of pride. It was, this is where we've come from. You always are going to have some degree, some semblance of a history somewhere that you're going to need to go back to look at and see how far we've come. And by tearing down all, and I'm trying not to get political here, but when it comes to the way we tore down all of, seeing this nation rip down all of the Confederacy and stuff, and I'm not saying I agree with that, but what I am saying is when we tear all of that down, what they're trying to do is erase that history. They're trying to erase what happened, and then they're trying to equate and get a culture, a generation here to think that times have not changed from here all the way back here. This nation went through a horrendous family against family civil war to end something that people today are still trying to make an issue. They're still trying to bring it up. And by tearing down the monuments that we can go back to and say, these people, this is where we've come from. These monuments we tore down were the end of what we were fighting for. With them out and nothing to look back to, then it just makes it easier. It makes it easier to perpetrate the lie that we're no better now than we was in the days of Abraham Lincoln. And we have a vast majority of Americans that actually believe that. That's why monuments are an important thing for us to look back to and say, we've come a long way. It may not be where we want it to be, but we've got a track record of where the worst that we was ended to where we are now. And that's what God would institute the setting up of monuments for the nation of Israel. They could always look back to see where they came from and to see where they are now. When you have that history to look back on. So, like I said, all of that's never going to go unanswered. The people that rose up against the nation of Israel, they got judged. Even though God allowed Israel to go into that captivity, God would always bring that down and set his people free. I mean, you go back to, that's what the Red Sea monument was. When the nation of Israel came out of Egyptian bondage, even though God used the Egyptians in Joseph's day to bring his nation through a famine and a hard time, they got into a point to where there came a generation up in Egypt that took the friendship between the Egyptians and the nation of Israel dissolved, and then they took them as slaves and he encamped them. Then Moses comes in and sets his people free. And when you read over there in the Exodus, when they come through the Red Sea, they erected the monument, the altar on the other side of the Red Sea, so they could take generations back and tell them, we used to be on that side of the Red Sea under bondage, and now we're here. But the nation of, you saw the 7 things that the nation of Egypt went through leading up to God setting his people free. God would always bring them up, but then he would also judge them and take them back down to set his people free. So when it comes to the things of, it's always good for us to stand with the Jew, like we said when we first started this back in 1948, when America stood and recognized the nation of Israel, how God has blessed this country multitudes and multitudes of times over, it's always good that we stand with them. And violence against his people will never go unanswered. If you look over in the book of Amos, chapter 1, verse 11 says, Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4 I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he did pursue his brother with the sword, and did cast off all pity, and his anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. And like I said, this is just one of many examples of God fighting, coming to the aid of his people. We can look back and when he brought them out and they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years because they rejected Canaan land because they thought they could not take it. A generation rose up against God, so he let them wander, killed them all off. And the generation to follow got to go in and experience Canaan land. But there were places in there that they had to go in and fight. The biggest one and the first one was the city of Jericho. We've talked about that. They come in, and God demolishes the city and takes that obstacle out of their way. The next one they come up to was a little city called Ai. This little city, they thought they could just take a couple hundred soldiers up and they would take the city. And that was the one battle in Canaan land that they lost the most people. Why? They thought they could do it on their own. But when they came back and got God on their side, they continued to march through Canaan land and taking the land that God promised them. He did not tell them how much, where their boundary was. All God told them is, as far as you possess, as far as your foot goes, as far as your imprint goes in this area, that land is yours. You can have as much or as little as you want. And they had to go in and run people off out of that because he had promised them that. He had promised Abraham that generations before. All they're doing now is coming in to possess what is theirs, rightfully theirs. So as we see, that's just some examples of God fighting the battles for Israel. We seen one of the ones, David. We just, Pastor went through this about 3 or 4 months ago in his There Is series, when he talked about Ziklag, when David and his mighty men are off fighting. The Philistines come in and take down Ziklag, and they come back and find everything gone. The camp burned to the ground and smoldering. And the people, David's mighty men, was wanting to do away with him. But what did David do? David went and asked of God, shall I pursue? And he said, pursue and recover all. And that's what David did. Wasn't it? These men were tired, but God gave them the strength to go and take and recover what was theirs. Right quick, shame fell on Edom. As we see here, he talks about, for the violence against thy brother, shame shall cover thee. Where does the shame come from? The shame of what God's talking about here fell on Edom and Petra by one-time allies Babylon. If you look back in verse number 7, it says, all the mighty men of thy confederacy. When we were going through that verse, and I told you we were getting to who that confederacy was, that was the nation of Babylon. This is coming in right before the Babylonian captivity of nation of Israel. Edom did not stand. They helped. We'll see that too. They helped Babylon take as many as they wanted of their brethren. As mightily as they defended the city, meaning Petra, what happened? Babylon got in. They sent in spies, and they took it from within. Like I said, that's the only way you're going to be able to do it. You couldn't come in, by force. You had to get, and what they did is, and like the old Trojan horse, remember that story? Trojan horse? They kind of came in as the friendlies, and they were welcomed in, hey, all right, you're our allies and everything else. And they got in, and then they rose up, and God used them to take down Edom and overthrow them. It's not often a nation that has been overthrown, doesn't have a small remnant left behind, but this supernatural annihilation, nothing nor anyone was left behind. When it comes to the things of the nation of Edom, there's a few people still alive, still going. If we get into it, and I have kind of studied a little bit more and got, but there's one more encounter with the nation between the Jews, the nation of Edom, in one man in one particular opportunity when Herod was an Edomite. He was from the descendants of what few people got out that was left to be, but that remnant was not strong enough. Now, when you're studying, when you go back over and you're studying Nehemiah, and he comes back to the city, to Jerusalem, there's a remnant of people there, a defeated remnant, but there's quite a few people still living in the devastated city of Jerusalem. And that's the people that he came in, encouraged, and that remnant rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. There's always remnant, but this remnant that is left of Edom, as we've said, I know I've said this before, this remnant was one that was so defeated time and time again after they lost Petra. They just got to the point to where they just said, it's not worth it. And they just kind of went their separate ways. And they never returned to make a nation again because God wasn't going to allow it anyway. But God brought about because of the violence. The violence that the nation of Edom had allowed to happen to their brethren, God judged them for. And that's why he brought about the end of Edom. So just a little bit. Next week we'll kind of look at verse 11, and we're calling that the visceral verse.
All right.